All right, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, we're here with Chris Lee, Vandy Sports, Southeastern 14 in studio. Chris, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I have a lot of respect for you. This will be a lot of fun, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, sorry that I'm sweating profusely after setting up this whole deal here. I literally tear down everything I got at the house, bring it in here, throw it all up, so apologies for that.
I've got a lot of respect for your equipment game here. I mean, you've got stuff I didn't even know existed. I think a lot of us just try to find a decent mic and turn it on, but you put a lot of money into this, and you take pride in what you do, and it shows.
Yeah, I think the only time I sweat more than this was when I had Feinbaum sitting there, because I was just nervous as hell when he was in here. You know what?
Yeah, it's weird having like somebody that you grew up admiring or idolized. And I think we all had one of those first moments. Mine was Will Purdue. I had him on a podcast, and I had him on several. But I'm thinking, man, how weird is this that a guy that I used to watch and was at the top of the world professionally.
Right.
It's a little bit of a different thing, but I can relate.
Yeah, and you still have him on the show. I noticed quite a bit on the Vandy Sports podcast.
Yeah, when I have time. Time's the scarce commodity in our business, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Time doing one thing is time not doing another, and I just don't think there's enough in it. I mean, in the news cycle in our profession these days, I was making the comment to someone that it's kind of like the NFL. NFL has got this thing perfected where it's a 12-month news cycle, and I feel like in college football we've got that, and whatever void we have for a few weeks is filled with the College World Series or whatever else now. So there's almost no down. I'm not sure there is any downtime in our job. If you find
that's a blessing and a curse, you know what?
Right. It was like having open practice at Vandy. I'm like, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing because nobody else does it like that. We get access that nobody else gets. And I mean, I say that facetiously. It's a great thing. I'm grateful for it. But at the same time, when the gates are open, people expect you to be there, and there's that too.
Yeah, when I get people in here, Chris, I love to get a little background. So just in case anybody in my audience not familiar with who you are and you're coming up, but I also think the journey. That's another thing. I have so many people that we come in and we talk with. Everybody has a different journey to how they got to where they are. So, how long have you been covering Vanderbilt? And now you cover the entire SEC. But I'm curious to know when you kind of start down this path.
Well, I'll start back at the beginning. If you had asked, somebody what 9-year-old Chris, what should he be doing one day? I think everybody would have pointed to this. I went to college. I had a great time. I was a really shy kid growing up. So at the same time, I could have seen myself being in sports media. Being in front of a camera or a microphone would have terrified me. And really when I got into the broadcast at first, I thought of myself as a writer who was just doing this because it helped pay the bills. And it kind of turned into something else to where 95% of what I do is this and not that. But I was always a baseball guy. Love baseball, love history, love going to games, collecting cards, the whole 9 yards. But any sport I loved. And I went to college, and they didn't have journalism as a major where I went. If they did, then I probably would have done it, but they didn't. And I got in fraternity and did all the college things, and you get sidetracked with that and like, oh, I got to pick a major. So I picked business because my big brother in my fraternity was in business, and I was having a conversation with him, and we had to declare a major the next day. So like, all right, we're doing business. And so that's what I did. Ended up with the management tract, and went to work in higher ed for a while. I just loved the college environment, being around college kids. I was a recruiter for a bit. And I think at some point you decide you've got to grow up and do something. And so I did that. I decided, well, I like the college thing, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to get a doctoral degree, and I'm going to be a professor. And I liked stats and economics and stuff. I was like, that's what I'm going to go into. And I got a couple months into grad school and remembered how much I hated studying. It's like, I don't think I can do this and not want to pull my hair out if I get a doctorate. not to mention you're not making any money, and you're going to need that to live. And somewhere in there, I'd always played fantasy baseball, and I'd just dabbled in some things. And I thought, I think I'd like to be like a baseball analyst. And so that was in the back of my head, and there was something I was working on. I wrote a fantasy baseball book at one point that I self-published, and just out of the blue, I got a call one day from a buddy of mine that was at this company called Rivals.com, and he said, we need somebody to run a Vandy site. I think you'd be great for it. And not knowing any better, sure.
So you had not even covered Vanderbilt when they reached out to you?
No, I hadn't done it. I had this idea that I wanted to get into the sports. Again, I thought if you'd said 30-year-old me, what are you going to be doing? I would have said I'll probably end up doing some baseball analyst stuff. This is right when Moneyball was becoming a big thing, and I'd grown up reading a lot of Bill James. I don't know if you know who Bill James is, but he was sort of the guy that got everybody thinking in the direction that Moneyball really went. And you could just see at the time there were so many inefficiencies in baseball and bad decisions that it was just like it was low-hanging fruit to criticize everybody's decisions and see that there's a better way. Now I can't even keep up with it. I mean, analytics are so advanced. I look at it, my eyes get crossed. But I had this idea of doing sports something, and I thought it would be baseball. The covering it like as a beat guy, it really had not occurred to me as an adult, and so having a free opportunity on a plate to kind of work when I wanted, and hey, you get press passes, and I mean that, like, for most of us when we get into this, you're just happy to be there on the scene, and you're kind of wide-eyed and starstruck, and connecting the dots on the analytics thing. I decided I was going to cover a couple years into doing the Vandy thing, which I was doing part-time. Like, hey, I love baseball. I don't know a lot about college baseball. I watched College World. I'm going to get into this and just see what this is about and try to do maybe apply some analytics to what we're doing. Well, in college, that was completely foreign at the time. And so I kind of dipped my toe into college baseball and really loved it. Thought the product is tremendous. You feel like you're watching this secret that nobody has discovered. I think like in the last 5 years that's changed. Like when I started covering college baseball, nobody was doing it. You look at the Florida beat, they're a national power. Nobody in Gainesville's covering baseball. Now everybody's covering baseball on a beat level. But so that was kind of a neat thing, and I know I'm detouring a little bit, but sort of the opportunity to merge something I had out there as an idea of what I wanted to do into an opportunity that dropped into my lap was one of the cool things about our journey. And fast forward into when we started Southeastern 14, I did that with the idea that I still didn't think at a league level baseball and basketball got covered very well. Like if you wanted to find out LSU baseball and know stuff about your team, yeah, there's a lot of great places to do it. But just to follow, if you're an LSU fan, to follow what Florida's doing and what Arkansas is doing, there wasn't a really great landing spot for all that. And that's kind of how Southeastern 14 eventually started. But just on a 30,000-foot view, that's kind of how it all came together, and that was over basically a 20-year period.
Yeah. Well, so you've been covering Vanderbilt a long, long time. I could only imagine, and I've listened, you've shared this on Vandy Sports, the highs and lows, but are there any like horror stories that you can share? I think one of my favorite...
How much time have we got?
Because I think people would be kind of curious to hear stuff like that. I think I heard on one of your podcasts, one of your guests say that I think it was like in the facility where they're working out. I mean, they didn't have air conditioning for the entire summer or something like that, and it's just mind-boggling. I mean, that would not last a day in Alabama.
Yeah, it's a weird beat. I think I've always wondered if you could. I've always got in my head, I'd love to create these alternate universes where you could just make stuff happen. Right. And I'd like to take somebody like on the Alabama beat and drop them into the Vandy beat for just a year. Just like, I always use this as an example. I had a condo one time and owned it for a couple years. And I woke up one day and I went into the bathroom, and for whatever reason, I looked near the ceiling. There was a beam. It's like, I've seen this beam for years. it looks crooked. And sure enough, I got out my tape measure, and it came down like 13 inches from the side and like 14. I'm like, this has been right in front of me the whole time, and I just looked past it. And like, I think if you took somebody into the Vandy beat and dropped them in there, like, how many things would they notice that I just sort of took for granted? Because you're used to seeing your beat through your particular lens, and I think it'd be a fascinating experiment. But yeah, I mean, I think the Clark Lea, when he took the job, and he'll tell you this, there were so many minefields and things. Like, he had played there, and his dad still lives in Nashville. They followed I think he walked into that thinking, I know what I'm getting into, because I was there. We lost for 4 years, or how many years he was there. I grew up in town. You kind of think you know what you're getting into, but like the whole locker room not having air conditioning. I had a couple people that reach out to me and like, I don't know if you know this is going on, but the kids have been working out for 6 months or for 6 weeks in the summer, and there's no AC in the lot. I'm like, how does this happen? And I put that out there, and that ruffled a lot of feathers at Vanderbilt. Also got the air conditioning fixed quickly. I got some thank yous for that. They're like, hey, thanks for sticking your neck out for us, because, they said they were going to fix it. They said nobody needs to go to the media, and yet, when you put it on your pod, that's when stuff happened. There's been a lot of moments like that.
Yeah, and would you be willing to share your thoughts on James Franklin? Because I know a lot in the national media, my God, they love this guy. A lot of them do. And I think the greatest accomplishment he's had is he got 9 win seasons at Vanderbilt. That he's still clinging to that years and years later. But I know you are not particularly a big fan of what he did at Vanderbilt. Can you share any of that?
Look, I think the guy's a tremendous football coach. I think he works as hard as anybody. There's things about James I like. There were battles that he was willing to take on. What I didn't like about James is I felt like everything was about James eventually. That there were kids that he had committed at times that he didn't really want it public because, well, this kid's a 2-star. We think he can play. Well, why would you care? Right. Well, if you're looking to take another job and you got a 2-star that drags your recruiting rankings down from 30 to 35 or whatever, that's the kind of stuff you think about. He was a guy where everything was transactional and everything was about what can advance my brand. And he wanted everything written and said that way. And you can't do your job as a writer, honestly. And there's a lot of people in business that'll do that because you get scoops, you get things. But eventually, if you take yourself seriously, and some people don't care. They're just out to do it as a fanboy. I wasn't out to do that. And I even had a conversation with him one time. I said, you think you want stuff written that puts you in a good light. But I said, eventually what's going to happen, first of all, I'm not going to do it, but let's say I played the game. Eventually what's going to happen, people are going to see through it. Yeah. And there's going to be a time when you might need my help on something when you're in the right. And if I just say, well, I'm up there defending James Franklin, what are people going to say? Well, of course he is. That's what he always does. And of course, with the Brandon Vanderbilt incident a few years later, that basically set their football program back probably a decade, maybe more. I actually thought that some of what was in the public narrative wasn't entirely fair to him. And maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But as a reporter, you go where you are. And that includes a lot of times defending a guy that you may not like. But your job is to be fair. And I could have actually, and I actually did defend him in a few cases. I still don't think after it was over, he saw it clearly. And that's kind of the way with egomaniacs. But it was. Look, he was great for. I never dreamed that they would do the stuff they did, and it was fun to cover something other than a 30-point blowout to another SEC team every Saturday. That was, for a brief period of time, I got to see how the other half lived. But man, it was hard.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you can't speak for other people like national writers and stuff, but you certainly think that, or is it safe to assume he knew how to play those people to where, I mean, they still sing his gospel now. And I mean, what's a guy? I mean, I realize they beat Ohio State like once, but I mean, I don't know where he gets this amazing reputation.
Well,
aside from what he did, the wins at Vanderbilt, incredibly impressive. But again, that was a long time ago.
yes, but I think the hardest thing to do is win consistently. Like, look at Mark Richt at Georgia, right? Mm-hmm. How many losing seasons did Mark Richt have at Georgia?
Maybe just the last one, right? And I don't even know if they were losing. I think they were like 7-5.
I don't think they were losing. Did they even win 9 or 10? I mean, I don't remember. They won a lot. Yeah. Sometimes the worst thing you can do is be really good for a long time, because then people expect you to be great and win national titles. And I think it's a lot harder than people think just to be really good for a long time. Like, look at Alabama. Alabama has seemed kind of invincible, and like with Florida, this was the case with Florida for a while. But you go back through history, if you want to go back 30, 40 years, you had some seasons where Alabama even lost more. I mean, even Nick Saban's first year, I think they went 6-7 or 7-6, and I think the way everything is now, everybody puts their eyes on the top guy, and that's kind of where everybody's bar is set. Right. And you see this happen at SEC schools. Like, I thought Butch Jones at Tennessee, for example, was a pretty good coach. They were winning 8-9 games. They'd been down for a while, and then the pressure to get back to where Phil Fulmer had him sort of took its toll, and you could just see him crack under it. And that happens with a lot of people. I think there's something to be said for winning 8, 9, 10 games every year. I don't care if you're at Alabama or you're at Georgia. That's hard to do, because you see instances at Ohio State, another one. Go back to who was the guy after Cooper?
Tressel, Jim Tressel.
Well, I think there was a guy in between that didn't last long, which tells you everything you need to know. We've forgotten his name. Maybe I'm imagining that, but the point is, like, you can pick any school in the country. And you can find that story somewhere where, okay, well, we think we should be winning national titles, and they change the next guy, and there's a 4-8 in there. Right. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I don't know that James is an elite coach. I don't know that Penn State's ever going to get past the ceiling that they're currently at. But, occasionally you see it. Frank Beamer did it for a while. He achieved a certain level, then they were playing for national championships one day. Yeah. But I do think in James's defense, it's awfully hard to win 8, 9, 10 games every year, and he's been pretty good at doing that wherever he's been.
Who's the best overall football player you think that you've covered at Vanderbilt?
Cutler.
Really?
Yeah.
Smoking Jay Cutler, huh?
Smoking Jay Cutler. I remember, man, and sometimes I think with kids like him, you don't know how good they are exactly until it's on the other side. And like, he was SEC Player of the Year. Everybody had a pretty good idea Jay was a good player. Got drafted in the first round. And I wish for him his career had gone differently, like he'd had a better offensive line or better something. Because the thing on Cutler was, well, he's just kind of an average NFL quarterback. But it's like what we just talked about, like, how many guys are average NFL quarterbacks for a decade? I mean, if you said, hey, Mike, you can be one of the best 15 in your field in the world at the hardest job within that profession, and you can do that for a decade, hey, sign me up. That's we tend to set our bar at Aaron Rodgers or whatever, but I think what he did at Vandy and just willing him to that win in Knoxville and doing some things, and I mean, to win SEC Player of the Year on a team that had a losing record, how many times has that happened? I mean, maybe that might be the only time in our lifetime, and I think to follow it up, and the kid had diabetes.
Really?
He didn't know it for the longest time. And I don't have it, but from what I understand, that is brutally tough to play through. You look at all the stuff that was up against him. I remember his first game when they played Georgia Tech. I just thought, he's going to get broken in half. He got hit more times than a Mike Tyson punching bag that day. And I think just having to go through that with no offensive line, no receivers, and then build it to where, hey, they went to Knoxville and beat Tennessee. And I know that Tennessee wasn't vintage Tennessee, but that's something Vanderbilt hadn't done. And 20-something years, I think that you throw the diabetes layer on top of it. And the other thing, I don't think people realize how good an athlete he was. He was an all-state basketball and football player. I mean, and baseball player on top of that as shortstop.
Mm-hmm.
I would have liked to have seen, again, you put him in an alternate universe, with Alabama, with maybe the Saints under Sean Payton or something like that. I would have liked to have seen what it could have been.
Funny story about Jay Cutler. So my college roommate, he goes to every Tennessee game. He never misses a game. When we were in college, he missed one game. It was that early kick. He was like, it's just Vanderbilt. I'm not going to go watch that damn game. And Vanderbilt won it. Yeah. He's never forgiven Jay Cutler for that.
Yeah, I think that left a mark that day. I actually went to that game to cover it. I didn't. The whole drive up, I don't think it ever occurred to me they were going to go in and win that game.
Yeah,
because they had started, I think, 4-0, and they'd blown a bowl shot. They had a game against Duke that was really winnable, and they just played horribly, played conservatively, and they'd blown their shot at a bowl, and Tennessee had beaten them so many times in a row that it just kind of felt like whatever's going to happen was going to happen. And I mean, I don't really blame him. I don't think a lot of people thought they were going to go up and win that game that day.
How high on that list does Jordan Matthews rank? Because to me, he's the best Vanderbilt player. I mean, non-quarterback, in my opinion, that I've ever seen. And one series in particular, I don't know if you remember this, and I may have the details a little bit wrong, but I think it was against Ole Miss, and he got clocked. And I think he was vomiting on the field. Like, in today's football, they would have sat him out. And he stayed in the game and then made a touchdown, an incredible touchdown, like, immediately after. I thought maybe his career was ended or something like that. But, yeah. I mean, he was a hell of a player.
He really was. I think my three would be him. It would be Cutler, Matthews, and Zach Cunningham. And I think that's a pretty easy three for the ones I've covered. I can't think of anybody that would be even really into the discussion with those guys. And Jordan, I think if they played their cards differently when he was a freshman, he might still have records in the league. The thing that got broke by Devontae Smith broke a lot of his. But I remember they weren't very good his freshman year, and they'd bring him into games. They'd be down, 30 points to Florida or whatever. They'd put in the subs. And he had a string, like he had about 4 straight games where he'd come in the fourth quarter and he'd catch a touchdown pass. I'm like, wow, why don't you play this guy more? And maybe the answer is he's playing against, third-team defenders. Well, okay, well, you're, probably his offensive linemen that were blocking for his second-team quarterback were reserves too. So it was sort of apples to apples. But I always thought, well, what if he got to lose? But I think I wonder now if they'd gone back and played his freshman year a little differently, if he'd have records, it would still have his name on them in the league.
Yeah. I want to ask you about this. I don't want to get you in trouble or anything, so feel free to dodge this question or just avoid it or whatever. But what was that? What was her name? Sarah Thomas or whatever?
Sarah Fuller.
Sarah, what was the deal with that? And I mean, did that just destroy the Derek Mason era? Or was it already destroyed? Because I know so many players left, and that was during COVID, right?
Yeah.
So the players were allowed to opt out, and we were seeing opt-outs not just at Vanderbilt but all across the SEC. But really, that was kind of a sign of quitting or just not wanting to be there anymore. And
yeah,
I mean that was just, and then it obviously became a national storyline. But I don't know many people besides from you that would have better information on just what all that was going on.
Yeah, that was kind of part of. I'll give you an answer that's truthful, but maybe more diplomatic than I would have said 3 years ago. I think that thing got a life of its own, and once it got publicity and traction, and I don't think the school regretted any of it. It took on a life of its own. A lot of people didn't want to be the guy to spoil the Disney movie, but underneath the surface, there were a lot of people just pissed about that, though, because it wasn't what it was made out to be. You had kids on that team that could have kicked, and kicked pretty well. Just the details I got about how far behind. For instance, I had somebody tell me that you've got to get a kickoff in 1.3 seconds from snap to hitting the foot. The op times were closer to 3 seconds. When all I can say is they had other options who'd kick before in games. You connect the dots and tell me, but the public narrative had gotten so out there and everybody was so invested in it that I think at that point it was going to just be a freight train that ran anything over that said contrary.
Right. And just unfortunately for Vanderbilt and their fans, it's like, of course it's Vanderbilt that was going to do that. You know what I mean?
Well, and the thing that people would say, because I was critical of it at the time, and I couldn't say everything I knew, but I knew enough to know I wasn't wrong about it. People say, well, they're winless. Okay, great. I go out to the field every day, and they might be winless, but I'm covering them when it's 95 degrees, and guys are about to pass out. They're having to go drink gallons of. I mean, you can say what you want. Those guys put in a lot of work. Those guys, all when they were 8 or 10 years old, their dream was to go play football. And maybe it's Vanderbilt, maybe they're winless, but it's people whose parents sacrificed. It's people who, you got parents driving hundreds of miles to a game on Saturday in hopes I can see my kid play. Right. And I think to disrespect everybody like that, to me, maybe I was the one guy that had a different narrative. It was kind of following closer to what was really going on.
Right.
And maybe they were a bad team, and sure, I was critical of them. That's your job. But I thought, I have a lot of respect for what these kids and these families go through. And if in my position I don't stand up for them a little bit, I don't think I can look at myself in the mirror the same way again. That might put me on a little bit of an island on our profession. And I thought it was a horrible time for our profession. Yeah. I just how can you not? You guys know what these kids go through in camp. There was a kid out there somewhere that had been on the scout team for 3 years and just wanted to get his name into a box score. And I cover some of these kids that, and you see this at every SEC, they're kids that go walk on and they're a tackling dummy and they never get in a game, which I think is unconscionable. When you see some of these teams that have 50-point leads, can he not put the guy on the kickoff team for one play just to let his family see him be on the field and let him say, I did it? To me, all that was worth the pushback would be the nice term for it that I got. But I have too much respect for the people I cover and the work they put in just to let that go.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm such a big fan of you, Chris, because you tell it as you see it, and you're not corrupted like so many other people. But moving on to better stuff, Clark Lea, of course, the transformation is already underway. They still got a long way to go. But I asked this to someone the other day, and they didn't. They said that's a good question, but I can't answer it. So I know you'll be the right guy to answer. What do you think is the bigger challenge for Clark Lea, being a consistent bowl team? And that's not to say if they miss a bowl, we got to fire the guy, because that's crazy where he took it over. But is it trying to make Vanderbilt a consistent bowl team? Is that a bigger challenge, or getting Vanderbilt fans to fill that stadium on Saturdays? Because that's a tough thing that's no fault of his own, but that's a huge obstacle, I think, in his football program's way.
Boy, it might be the second, because I would see James Franklin. Okay, they're winning 9 games. They did it twice. Even the 6-7 team, that was a good 6-7 team. They were that close to beating an Arkansas team that wound up in the top 5. If Zach Sacey doesn't fumble, maybe the only time in his career, at the one and it gets run back the other way, that's like a 14-point swing. They win that game. Mm-hmm. They were really close. And he would get mad. I remember he was furious. I think it was the Wake Forest game. Not that Vanderbilt's ever had a big student attendance, but they had as many they'd ever had. And it was Thanksgiving. Well, the Vanderbilt demographic. None of those kids are from here. Right. They're all from somewhere else. And most of them are rich enough they can fly home to China or to New York City or wherever. It's a ghost town for the most part. And so they had a game, I believe it was against Wake Forest, They were primed to go to a bowl, and I think this was just James's excuse to make himself feel better. But he was just so ticked off that they had maybe 33,000 people, and Wake brought enough people to fill this room we're in. So it was a very Vanderbilt crowd, and he was angry that stadium wasn't filled, and that told me a lot. I grew up here in the '80s, and they would fill the stadium when they were awful because there was nothing else in town. But man, the demographics have changed. Mike, it's been 60-something years since they were good consistently in football. And that takes a toll. I mean, and you go around to games, and it's a lot of times, especially at Memorial Gym, it's an old fan base. Baseball games, you'll see people coming in with oxygen tanks.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it is an old fan base, and when you lose consistently, they've got a long time to reverse 60 years of neglect and bad decisions. And I think probably, and I think winning there is hard, and his job's gotten harder because it shifted from facilities and everything when he took the job, and now they're addressing all that stuff. You go by, you see the cranes. Now it's like facilities, shoot, it's NIL.
Right. It's a bad time to do all this work.
Well, it is. I mean, it is, but
it needed to be done.
Well, it's kind of like saying, okay, I just need a car. Okay, well, here's your car, but the floorboard's rusted, and you can see the rain splashes up on you. I mean, yeah, and that's kind of the analogy for their facilities. Yes, you can say it's switched in. They still needed to do something, and they are. Mm-hmm. So it's going to help, but I think Clark's job has gotten tougher, and I think that just even if they win games, you'll have some people back, but the fan base has been beaten down they don't do a lot to make new fans. That's the one criticism I have of what they've done. I think they're doing a lot of great things, and I applaud them for it, but I don't think that they are really, I'm not sure, and maybe it's just they've got so much to bite off, you can only do so much. But I feel like they could be doing a better job of building a fan base, and I do wonder, let's say they win 8-4 this year, which I don't think they're going to, but just for argument's sake, like what would that look like on senior day? I don't know. Might be 24,000 of their own fans, but getting to a number above that, it's getting hard to imagine because we haven't seen it in so long.
So, yeah, I think you kind of just answered this, but are they utilizing Nashville and all the entertainment and the country music, and now there's all kinds of other music too, but there are ways I think they can make each game an event to get people to come out, and they're clearly not doing it. You think that's a bad missed opportunity here in Nashville?
I think they do it in stops and starts, and I think there are days they do a really good job, but ultimately you can't, it's not minor league baseball, right? You can't get people to the park just because it's a fireworks display. You got to win games, and this is what I do, and maybe they are, but I just hear so many things about, well, I had season tickets for 30 years and I dropped off and nobody ever called me, or somebody called me and they didn't realize I used to have season tickets. Like they've never done a good job of connecting the left hand with the right over there with that. And the other thing I would do, and this is a school that's just flush with cash, and I guess that's easy for me to say, it's not my money, but I think to me, you could make it a family event. Okay, here's four season tickets. It'll cost you $600. We'll throw in 4 Cokes and a parking pass or whatever. Mm-hmm. To me, they've got to start building a fan base and make it a family event and find something to do. I think they'll have boosters that just for vanity will pay, a couple $1,000s a game to buy a suite because look who I am. I've got the suite. But I think they've got to, if it's me, and maybe I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't work in that, but to me, I think you could get a lot of goodwill, and that'd be your best way to build a fan base is try to put together something as families and get people in the habit of going, and just something along those lines. It just, to me, it's just so embarrassing every time you go to a game over there and you're outnumbered by whoever, whether it's, of course Tennessee's going to come in and take over their stadium. At this point, of course, but what about Kentucky and South Carolina? Can you not have a home field advantage for those. I mean, to me, that seems doable, but it hasn't been that way in a while. And here's the weird thing, Mike. When you go to a bowl game, and they've not been in a few years, I remember going to Birmingham in 2014, and that's when James Franklin was really mad because they'd gone to whatever bowl it was the year before. He felt like they'd been underslotted. So it's like, they're not going to do this to us 2 years in a row. Yeah, they stick him in Birmingham at 8-4. And to be fair, it wasn't a flashy 8-4. It was kind of a little bit of a smoke and mirrors 8-4. They weren't as good as they were the year before, but when has that mattered? Right. And he felt like they deserved the Gator or something. And I think if you're going to do it in a lifetime achievement kind of way, I don't think he was wrong. And they got sent to Birmingham, which that place was such a dump at the time. I remember going down there. Vanderbilt put 35,000 people in that place for a bowl game that everybody was pissed off that they were at. And I thought, man, that even surprised me at the time. And I wonder, like, if you could replay that whole script, how many people would be there, because I think that would tell you a lot.
Yeah. Well, transitioning now to Southeastern 14, you cover the entire league in multiple sports, like you mentioned. But what was the thought process by not just covering Vanderbilt, covering the entire league? Why did you make that decision? And what are you trying to accomplish with a great YouTube channel? I mean, I go on there just to get ideas and see what you're doing, see what's working. Because I think that's the only way to do it is see what other people are doing, see what works, and trying to put your own spin on things, you know?
Well, thanks. First of all, it's the biggest compliment anybody can pay anybody, and I appreciate that. But I think the genesis of this goes back probably 20 years. I used to, in preparation for Vanderbilt playing Florida, whoever for series, I used to write previews, and people don't read those. I've stopped doing them. But I just, sometimes you just do something to do a good job. That's, right. Forget the money and stuff. Just have pride in what you do. And I used to try to, I remember I'd put together a lineup, and I'd look through the box scores. I'm like, well, wait, their second baseman hasn't played in 2 weeks. And you'd Google it, and you'd find nothing. And then this was pre-Twitter. It's a little bit easier now. But I just thought, how can this be where you've got a national title caliber program and you can't find out anything about what's happening with this situation or that situation? And info was just really scarce. And you couldn't just pick up the phone and call a buddy in the media at that time because nobody then was covering it either. Well, again, I talked about it earlier. That's changed a little bit. But I still think at a big level, it just amazes me. And I shouldn't be complaining because this created opportunity. I just thought, if I'm just Joe SEC fan out there and I want to know what happened at LSU, I know 5 places I can go and find that out. But if I'm Joe LSU fan, I want to know what happened last night at Arkansas, what's going on at Ole Miss, what's going on at Vandy. To be able to find that efficiently in one spot is not easy. And that's kind of what we did. We founded our channel, and it was originally a website before we flipped more to YouTube. It's like, I would just like to serve that guy that wants to know what's going on with the league or scouts or whoever would listen, and to get everything in one stop to where if you come on as a Missouri baseball fan and nobody covers that program, hey, this guy's going to talk a little bit about like what Luke Mann did last night or whatever. And that was kind of our mission. Like everything else, you kind of find out football's king. And to be brutally honest, I thought there's so many people covering football that we could do it, but we get lost in the jungle. And it, for whatever reason, it didn't happen. People found us for football and found us pretty quickly. But that's kind of, if I could just do the job as just a guy where money's no object, and you're not worried about are 5,000 people going to see this or 10,000, and just do a service to people just for the joy of doing good work. That was sort of the whole impetus behind what we did from the beginning, and especially to do it in underserved markets.
Well, I think to your point, it's not being done. And I've said this. I should probably stop saying this because I might eventually do it. But I've said repeatedly, ESPN, SEC Network, and particularly SEC Network. I think they've got great people and they do a hell of a job in just about everything they do. But they are not doing what we're doing. No. And I don't understand for the life of me why they don't just do. If they did what we were trying to do, they'd crush us in an instant. But they will not do it. And I've been told from people there high up that they won't do it. They have no plans to do it. So, hey, we're like filling a void that is there, and people are responding to it.
Yeah, and I'm not. Now that I've done this, and like I said, we did football as kind of an afterthought, and then you see the numbers for football, like, well, no wonder. Everybody's motivated by money and sponsors, and now I get it. But it does annoy me when you turn on the SEC network and it's super regional time, and they're talking about the same recycled football topics that everybody's talked about since January. And I'm just like, do your athletes not deserve better? I think, to me, at some point, the things that motivate me, I mean, of course, we're all motivated by money because we have bills to pay, but I would rather do something that I have fun with and I feel like is filling a void than get rich over it. Mm-hmm. I think the people that approach that from a top-down level in our field, there just aren't enough of them. And that's why there's no product, because everybody's motivated by the other things. But to me, I think I get more joy out of being the guy that somebody can go to get something that they wouldn't get otherwise than I do making an extra buck. Yeah. And that's probably stupid. I hope my wife's not watching this because she might want to kill me. But I mean, I don't know. It goes back. I think it goes back to our 9-year-old self. Like, what would we be doing if we could do anything? And I think if you don't wake up with that some days and you lose sight of it and you get caught up in all the other stuff, it becomes drudgery rather than it become. And look, I've had it take me there too. But I think if you can get back to, like, what would I be doing if I could do anything? And you just have a day where you can pursue that with all your heart and your energy. Those are the days where you find the real joy in what we do.
Mm-hmm. This is probably a tough question to answer, but where do you think all this is going? Because I feel like guys like you and I we're on the right path, and I think it can just keep getting bigger and bigger, because I don't know if people realize it, but YouTube is the number 2 website in the world, or search engine behind Google. So I mean, the audience is there. You just have to make quality stuff, and people will find it. Yeah. Maybe it happens a little bit slower than I want sometimes, but it does happen. It just, for me personally, it gets bigger and bigger every single year.
Yeah, I've thought that too, and I'll give you a thing that sort of validates it. Like, I'll be at a super regional baseball game, and I'll have people texting me that never talk baseball, or that are watching it. That's told me, like, man, I think there's this thing out there that people like, that this speaks to. Mm-hmm. And it's weird because and I guess this is being redundant, but I've got 2 business degrees. But I find it's the creative side and it's the serving fan bases and things and underserved topic side that really is what gets me out of bed. And I could just keep thinking maybe it's not organized enough. I don't know what it is, but I just get up and I keep pushing every day, thinking at some point and we have to some degree. But I'm with you. I think that the product is good enough and there's enough people out there that it's going to resonate somewhere. Just, I think at the corporate business level, the people that put together the media ventures don't really see it the way you and I do. And I think this is probably stupid of me to come on your show and say it, because I feel like somebody's going to be watching this one day and, well, of course, and they're going to do something bigger and better and throw more money at it, and I'll be out of a job. But just speaking honestly, that's my answer.
Yeah. So looking ahead to the upcoming football season, what will you guys be implementing that's new, and anything that's exciting you? Because anytime you guys put out the previews, it seems like for the next week, 10 minutes after the last game's over, you guys are always first to market.
Right.
And hey, that seems to serve you well. Yeah. Any other, what else you guys got cooking over there?
Well, I think a lot of our things are previews and predictions, and I look, again, back to ideal self. I'd love to get up every morning and do a 1 or 2 hour show with callers and content, and just everything else kind of gets in the way, including making sure kids get off to school and that kind of stuff. But I mean, it'll be the same thing we've done. It'll be predictions. It'll be and a lot of that takes time. I don't like to just come and do something and do it halfway. Of course, you're going to do stuff that you're going to do, and you're going to read in your channel, you guys forgot to talk about this, or that guy's injured and you didn't catch it. You're always going to be vulnerable to that. But I think you're going to see a lot of what we've done before. I think you're hopefully going to see more topical stuff. I think you'll see a little bit more daily content, maybe a weekly-ish or a daily-ish type catch-all show. I've been in radio before. There's part of me that kind of misses that, just being able to come in and turn on the mic and talk about whatever I want to speak about today. That's my goal, is to get to more of that. But certainly the previews, the recaps, then when something big happens on a Saturday and I can go live and talk about it, we'll do that. But yeah, a lot more of the same, and hopefully a little bit more of some of those other things too.
And I know you're not a big hot take guy or anything, but do you have a take or two that is maybe an outlier, or team or player or anything, think exceed expectations, or first coach fired? I hate talking fired coaches, because I like to be optimistic. Particularly, everybody's optimistic. We're gonna go undefeated. We're gonna win the SEC. Unfortunately, that's not the reality. Once these losses start piling up, then people really they flip on a dime, optimistic to, we got to fire this guy, that guy. Yeah. Got any outlier takes or anything?
Yeah, I'll give you a take, and I'll give you a thing that I'm always kind of watching, that I don't know why we don't think about it more in terms of this. But the first, I think if I had an undervalued team, I think it might be Missouri. I spent a lot of time pouring through everybody's depth chart. I got this ridiculous thing, and I'm sure I could use my time better ways. But I've got a chart in front of me of everybody's team, and it's, Missouri, here's their first string left tackle. And all down to the fourth, and I'll put recruiting ratings in just because I don't want to miss something. Right. And so when I do that for every team, I'm like, man, these dudes have got a lot of guys coming back on defense that played there. Like, how many teams in this league can you name their starting secondary? And if you pay attention, you know who those guys are. And they all played there last year in the same spot. I mean, they got Tyron Hopper, who did a great job. I feel like they hit it with a couple of kids in the portal maybe that filled some spots. My memory's going hazy on this part. But I looked at them and I thought, okay, this is a team that I could argue could finish third maybe. Because to me, that South Carolina, Kentucky, Missouri pack, and a lot of people would put Florida in there too. I'm not as sure about that. To me, it's like, okay, to me in my mind, these teams are 3, 4, and 5. I'm just not sure what order. Well, when you saw the media days voting, Missouri was 6th, and not just 6th, but I think a pretty considerable distance behind Florida. That kind of surprised me. And maybe I'm out to lunch. Maybe everybody's seen something that I'm not. But to me, Missouri is that team. Their defense got so much better a year ago. Right. And I feel like Brady Cooks, I went back and looked at it, he's kind of an ordinary quarterback, and I'm not sure about their running game, but I feel like he was a little better than I remembered when I went back and looked at the stat sheet. So I would say that's kind of the thing that I think people might be sleeping on that team a little bit. The other thing that I'm always watching, and I remember saying this last year with Texas A&M, and I can't believe it wasn't a hotter topic. I looked at this and going, okay, you got Jimbo Fisher. You've got a booster base that is just fanatical and is wealthy. You've got this feeling that we can be winning national titles. Well, what do he go out and do? He signs this huge recruiting class that allegedly they spent $30 million on. I don't think they spent $30 million, but it became this bigger than life situation. And I'm going, what can go wrong here? and that's kind of the way it played out. Although I think they were probably, you look, they were right there in most games. Right. The computers still liked them as a top 30 or 40. It wasn't like they were awful. And if you're being reasonable about it, it's a bunch of true freshmen. Mm-hmm. So of course that can happen. I mean, maybe at Alabama or Georgia, but they got enough. They were just very reliant on young guys, and you had that pressure cooker. I think taking that same example, it's like the where can you see the pressure collapse something? Obviously, A&M would be an obvious answer. Florida would be another answer for different reasons. Missouri, if Drinkwitz goes another 6-win season, nobody likes 6 wins a year. I don't think he's a bad coach, but I presume they won't. So you can name like the ones where you could see it happen, but like, what about something out of left field?
I'll give you one that I've been thinking about that literally no one's saying this. And I don't think it's going to happen because I think they're going to be pretty good this year.
Yeah.
But one coach that I think could find himself on the hot seat real quick is Mark Stoops at Kentucky. And after they bottomed out, that may be too strong, but they were very disappointing last year.
Yeah.
There's hype this year. Looks like they nailed it with adding Ray Davis, Devin Leary. They added a left tackle. They have what a lot of people consider the best defensive coordinator right now in the SEC in Brad White. And they're a popular number 3 in the East. Some people say number 2. If they finish, again, 5th, 6th in the East, I'm not saying they'll fire him, but I think those fans are kind of fed up with, what the hell are we doing here, just winning 6, 7 games a year, which that's not fair to him when he got there, but we're 10 years in, and we're still winning 6, 7. I don't know. I think that's one to keep your eye on because if they do that again, if they go 6-6, I think they'll say, he has a tenuous relationship with the AD a little bit. The AD's got a problem with everybody apparently.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know. I think he could catch some hell, and they could be looking to upgrade maybe to Liam Cohen.
Yeah.
Or I don't know who it would be, but I think that's one to keep your eye on.
That's good, and we can construct the narrative there really quickly, right? And I don't mean to pick on Kentucky because a lot of teams are transfer reliant, but when it's year-to-year free agency, and these kids come in and they're getting paid a lot of money, and they're taking jobs from kids who waited their time, that's one way it can go wrong. The other way it can go wrong is if somebody doesn't get what I was expecting. Well, you're not paying me so now I'm going to quit or opting out. Like, how many situations have we seen, like at Auburn, perfect example, and Tennessee used to be this way, before Josh Heupel. Like, how many times did just everybody, you could see it with Derek Dooley and with Butch Jones, you could just see them just get crushed under the pressure every time they were in front of the microphone. Yeah. It's the same thing. He has taken something that was pretty bad, he's raised it to a level that they've never been, and now everybody's locked that in as an expectation. I'm like, well, when are we going to win the East? We maybe Georgia's the behemoth here and we can't take them down, but we should at least overcome Tennessee. He's in year 10 and Heupel's in year 3 or whatever. You can pretty easily construct narratives, and maybe those are fair, maybe they're not. You could see it, and then, we start putting a coach under the microscope. Well, what do they do every year in September, Mike?
At Kentucky?
Yeah.
They play 4 cupcakes.
Right. So then it's going to be, he's won 7 or 8 games, but that's because they're playing Eastern Kentucky and Ball State and Bowling Green.
Right.
Which was smart on his part, and it got him to some bowl games they probably wouldn't have been in otherwise, but that's what people start doing. That's not one that was in the back of my head, but now that you bring it up, you didn't have to connect the dots for me.
Right. And do you think it's fair to judge Billy Napier on this year, given, let me
go ahead. I'm sorry. I cut
Maybe
you
you're
off.
right. Maybe you're right. But he's at Florida. We're in the era of NIL and transfer portal. Yeah. And, Tennessee turning around. LSU, South Carolina. It is proven that you can flip it fairly quick. And if they suck again, which I'm not convinced that they will, but I kind of have been convinced all summer, and now I'm optimistic again where if they can beat Utah, they got a lot of home games right out the stretch. They always beat Tennessee at home. If they beat Utah on the road, I think they can beat Tennessee at home. I really do, because there's just bad mojo there. They could be 5-1 and sitting here, we'll say Coach of the Year. I'll be the first one to say it. Or they could finish 6th in the East again after he made the mistake. Remember when Brian Kelly got to LSU, basically I won't say half, but maybe 20, 25 guys exited the program. Yeah. That's kind of the way you got to do it now, because with the portal you even out quickly. Billy Napier did it backwards. He tried to get everyone to buy in, and they had about 30 guys exit after year 1. So again, I understand why they need to be patient, but I also think I just don't understand, Chris. We've seen this time and time again at schools like Tennessee and Florida, where they look at what Alabama and Georgia are doing, and they say, let's take that blueprint. Yeah. Let's try to beat this behemoth that is already a mile ahead of us by using their blueprint, and oh yeah, we're going to do it with talent that's not near as equal to them. I just think that's the height of stupidity.
Well, first of all, he's a build it guy in the middle of a flip it era.
Right.
And that causes problems because I like the way he's trying to do it. To me, I would rather have a guy, and of course I cover one at Vandy, where they're saying, hey, look, if we try to get in and compete with everybody else and do that, it's not going to work. If we try to build a culture that people are going to be attracted to, then that's how we're going to win. Now, look, that's what Napier's trying to do at Florida. Of course, Florida and Vanderbilt, it's apples and oranges. And I think the one thing that and of course you know this, the one thing I would say that you left out was the recruiting base. It's Florida. I mean, they can get talent in time. I look, because again, I go back to, I like the way he's doing it. You go back 15 years at Florida, if you want to go back to whenever, I mean, had a serial killer running around on their team starting. And I remember one time somebody told me that he might not have been the worst guy on that team. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good story, right? I kind of look at it like this. I like if I was, when I was watching media days, I was thinking, like, who are the coaches sitting up there that if I'm the father of a 17-year-old blue chipper, who are the coaches that I'd want my kid to play for? Now, where my bread is buttered might be a little different than a lot of people, but as a parent, I'm thinking, when I'm watching guys speak, I'm like, man, Billy Napier, Shane Beamer, those are guys that I think resonate with the message and are trying to create a culture that I'd like my kid to be a part of. Mm-hmm. Where they learn discipline and accountability, and it's just not a free-for-all like it was a lot of years under Urban Meyer, and Mullen had some issues too, and plus Mullen just didn't recruit very well. I like the way he's building it, but it's back to that pressure of expectations. He might be building something that's poised to stand a year, 2 years, 3 years from now, but if it goes 4-8, and by the way, I don't think they're beating Utah and Tennessee, and if it goes 4-8, and God help me, find somebody with a tougher schedule than they've got. They open with Utah, they close with Florida State, and they've got the SEC in between. Mm-hmm. I just wonder, in their rush to get to something, how are they going to handle it if it doesn't go well this year? And I don't look. This team got beat by Vandy at the end of the year. Right. I did not see that one coming. I remember going on Florida shows and, they just beat Kentucky. Do you think there's an upset? Like, no, it's not going to happen. They're too disciplined, whatever. Well, they lost. I think they're in for a hard year, and I just don't know, against the landscape of everything else, like, what does that look like at the end of the year if it's 4-8? Is there any concern for what it looks like on the horizon? Right. Or they just say 4-8 at Florida is not going to cut it, and if he's going 4-8, he's not our guy. I don't think they're going to do that, but that might be the most fascinating dynamic of a program this year is how all that can all go.
And then I believe in 2024 they play 11 Power 5 opponents because UCF is now a Power 5, so I guess they weren't anticipating that. And the hopes are they get this true freshman quarterback. I mean, good luck. You know what I mean? Last football question for you. I know you got to get going here. Tennessee, do you think they ever win an SEC championship with Josh Heupel as their head coach?
Gun to my head, yes or no. I would say yes, but it's back to the Kentucky thing. I was thinking about Tennessee the other day because I really like what he's doing. And it seems like the expectation is they've got the NIL thing going. Mm-hmm. He seems to me like he's a little bit more grounded. Like with Dooley and Jones, there was just something a little odd about both of them. He seems like a guy that's built to withstand the pressure cooker a little better. Maybe he's a little bit more relatable. I don't know what it is. You'd probably have a better idea than I would. But I started thinking, like, what if that just goes a little sideways? What if they lose the games they're supposed to lose? Let's say they got, something crazy happened, like a Texas San Antonio beat them. And I don't think that's going to happen, but let's say Joe Milton goes back to the Joe Milton before the 10 touchdowns
Who
and no
he's
picks
honestly
a year ago.
who he's been most of his career.
Right. People seem to have locked in this expectation that Joe Milton's going to be this guy that's getting talked about in the first round. Maybe he is, maybe he's not. I mean, you can't forget what he did with Hendon Hooker. It's not like when Hendon Hooker came in there, everybody's going, "Oh my goodness, he's gonna win 10 games with this guy." That was just another news item, the way I remember it. But let's just say, just for example, and I don't think this is going to happen, but what if that goes sideways? Because you've seen that, that's a place where there's too many people on that beat, first of all. When it goes crazy, they all go crazy together. It just gets to be a feeding frenzy, and you've seen other coaches crack under it. Again, I think he's made differently. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's the one where I wonder about too. Like if it misses expectations just a little bit, that's a culture which tended to eat itself a little bit. And again, do I think it's going to happen? No, but if it did, that'd be very interesting to see how that would unfold.
I think that answer is relying on how good Nico is, the freshman quarterback they got, because not next year or anything, but down the line, they'll never have the talent, I don't think, of Alabama or Georgia the way they recruit, but you can make up that separation with a truly elite quarterback like a Marcus Mariota, who that Oregon team had no business being in the national championship, but they had such a good quarterback. You know, we all know that the importance of that position, what it can do for you, but I think that's kind of where the answer lies on that one.
Well, and to your point, when I size up teams, I go back and look at where these kids were rated. And Brew McCoy, I think, was a 5-star, but most of these guys were not top 100 recruits. I mean, they've got 3 really good running backs. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think any of those guys were five-star guys. Their receiving core, it just seems like it's a plug and play. Now sometimes there's a weird dynamic that sometimes when you've just made a system work with dudes and you get more talent, maybe that comes with more prima donnas and stuff, and maybe that's the self-destruct element. But I think that's why when you asked me, do you think he can win it or not, and I said gun to my head, yes, because I think he's done it. And it's not just that he's done it with guys that were not what Alabama and Georgia have got, and even Florida in a lot of cases, but he took over for a defensive coach. And that program was a disaster,
particularly on offense. Unwatchable.
And it was unwatchable. And what do coaches do? What does a coordinator do if an offensive coordinator takes a head coaching job? Where are the better players on his roster in recruiting it? Are they offense or defense?
Always offense. And
so to me, that's what I think. That's why I'm bullish on him. Is he took not only was Pruitt. It was at a disaster for all the reasons everybody knows, but he took a defensive mindset that had built that roster, and he flipped it that quickly. I think that they won 7 games his first year.
Yep, should have been 8. They got robbed in the bowl game.
Well,
I was there.
That was wild. That could have easily gone the other.
Literally, I'd never seen in my life a whistle blown on the goal line while the guy's still going. You know, like you let that play out.
Well, okay, let's say that. Let's call it 8. 8 and 5 the first year. Was that maybe more impressive than what they did last year? I mean, maybe not, because that included beating Alabama, which seems impossible. But I think you could. That came out. You could debate it, right?
Yeah, certainly. All right, last thing. I really appreciate your time. Just because you're a Nashville guy, and I want to know, what's your favorite place to eat in Nashville?
Oh man,
people coming in for a Vanderbilt game, where do they got to go eat? That's a tough question. This is a good food city.
Well, here's the problem. I've got a 12 and a 9-year-old at home in Franklin.
Do they dictate the meal?
And I'm boring. So yeah, I mean it's we get more than our share of Sonic and Chick-fil-A. Is South Street still around? I hadn't been there in a while. That was always kind of a fun place.
Yeah.
I would do that on occasion for a game day. Of course, when I'm eating a medium meal with everybody else. I mean, if you're looking for close to Vanderbilt, I always like J. Alexander's, which is right next door. Food is phenomenal there. I mean, there's hot chicken on every corner.
Yeah.
I got dragged to hot chicken. I didn't get it at first, and now I'm kind of a believer. I just don't want it to.
I just don't like it when it makes you like cry. Like it's not even enjoyable for me.
Right. Well, I mean, the point of eating is to enjoy it, right? That's the part I don't get. But like I like spicy, but not Yes, and some genius somewhere has figured out that there's people like me and you that they can bring in as customers.
Right.
So I mean, pick your favorite hot. That is something that I thought at first was like, man, I don't get this, but that's kind of like one of our things now is hot chicken. So
Right.
you know, there's Big Shakes down where I live. That's around the corner. I like that one. I think there's one or two up here. Here's an off the wall for you. I discovered this the other day. Thanks to my buddy Anthony Dasher, who covers Georgia. Have you been to Parlor Donuts?
Oh yeah, right down. Oh,
yeah.
I've been too many times.
I got a kid who loves donuts, and I bribed him with something the other day to take him there, and that went over pretty well. That's like we're kind of this foodie town at the moment.
Yeah.
And like I think I missed my window by 20 years. Like, you know, if you could roll a time machine and put me single or young, married without kids, then I think I could do some damage around here. But the windows just didn't line up very well.
Yeah. Well, before you go, Chris, tell my audience, where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
Yeah, Vandy stuff is vandysports.com. It's on the Rivals Network, so we cover that pretty intensely. I've spent more of my time now on the Southeastern 14 side. Most of our stuff is on YouTube. We cover football, baseball, basketball pretty much year-round. Again, if you're looking for stuff that other people aren't covering, that's kind of what I like to do, but also covering the stuff that everybody else is covering too, because you have to. So if you're kind of looking for a one-stop shop to keep up with the league and those three sports, I think you'll like what we do.
Yeah, that's why my audience will love your stuff. That's why I love having you on, talking to me. So
And you do great stuff too, man. I appreciate your style. You know, I think the biggest compliment you give somebody is, you know, who do you listen to make sure you're not missing something? Yeah. And you're in my feed, and I've been listening to a couple on jogs this week, and I like you. You're a good dude. We just have always connected, and it's an honor to be on with you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I really appreciate it.
You bet.